Welcome to the Unwrapping Holiday Success webinar brought to you by Merge. My name is Stacy Hawes. I'm Chief Performance and Data Officer here at Merge. This is where we help retailers and e-commerce companies alike drive traffic and transactions across all digital channels, because as we like to say, as it turns out, you can buy happiness. Today, we're going to talk about a number of trends from the recent holiday season that will play a really important role shaping 2024 retail landscape. More specifically, we want to provide you with some strategies and tactics that you can employ immediately to help drive positive ROI and a positive impact now. So hoping for some great action items coming out of today's session. I'm excited to be joined by such an esteemed group of panelists from the retail industry. So before we dig in, I'd like to introduce you to our guests today. First, we have Doug Weiss. Doug's an industry leader across e-commerce, creators, and AI. He's currently serving as Vice President of Digital and E-commerce for WHP Global, which is a $7 billion portfolio of brands, including such brands as Toys R Us, Babies R Us, Isaac Mizrahi, and Anne Klein. Recently, Doug was the CEO of the restaurant and hotel review app Deets, and he was also the founder of the creator commerce team for Instagram shopping and Facebook shops. So big warm welcome to Doug. Next, we have Mark Friedman, who hosts the popular podcast, The Marketing Playbook. Mark has worked and advised many brands through his extensive career in all things e-commerce. He's worked with such brands as Brooks Brothers, Eddie Bauer, Amerimark, Steve Madden, and Warnaco, where he oversaw the digital businesses for Speedo, Calvin Klein underwear, and Calvin Klein jeans. I've known Mark for more than 20 years, and I'm thrilled he could be here and join us today. Next, we have Michael McMullen, the Managing Director and Director of Disruptive Technologies for Burns Communications Group. He brings deep expertise across the financial services, retail, and consumer product and tech sectors, overseeing some of the firm's most tenured client accounts, such as American Eagle, True Religion, and American Freight, as well as leading tech companies such as Lily AI, Radar, and Cart.com. So welcome, Michael. Unfortunately, our fourth panelist, Bryson White, was unable to join us live today. Bryson's the VP of Marketing and Digital for Black Diamond Equipment. I did have the opportunity to meet with Bryson last week to get some nuggets and insights that I'll weave into the discussion today. And for those of you not familiar with Black Diamond, they're a manufacturer of equipment for climbing, skiing, and mountain enthusiasts. But we're excited to have Doug, Mark, and Michael live with us today to discuss the current and quickly evolving retail landscape. It was really a game-changing holiday season where we saw e-commerce break a new record, with US shoppers spending more than $222 billion online during the holidays. That's almost a 5% rise year over year. Consumers were really on the hunt for deals this past holiday, and retailers showed up for them. As a result, we saw a record 11 days with over $4 billion a day in daily spending. Mobile also came out as a clear winner over desktop for the very first time, with over half of online sales this past holiday transacted via smartphones. That's pretty staggering. Christmas Day was the single biggest day for more mobile shopping, driving 63% of online sales that day. The rising popularity of flexible payment options like buy now, pay later also played pivotal roles in online spending. Buy now, pay later usage hit an all-time high, contributing $16.6 billion in online spend, up 14% year over year. In fact, Cyber Monday was the biggest buy now, pay later day in history. And as far as retailers' marketing investments go, paid search was the biggest driver of sales, driving 29% of online holiday sales. Bryson at Black Diamond also confirmed that this was the case for them. Paid search was a clear winner for them again this past holiday season. But other major contributors were direct web visits, email, affiliate, organic search, which is really driving home the importance of an omni-channel approach, which we'll talk about today. So today we're going to ask our expert panelists to help us look at a number of trends driving the future of retail. So let's start with the digital landscape and discuss how the sales ecosystem is really evolving. One major shift we saw this past season was the growth of social commerce. So Doug, I'm going to turn it over to you, live from the Toys R Us office. From your experience, how are retailers navigating this increasingly complex ecosystem?
Yeah, so thanks so much, Stacey, and thanks for having me today. I think social commerce in many ways has been around for many years, right? Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, all of these different platforms where people are consuming content for many years have been, had different types of tools for brands to potentially, introduce themselves to consumers and potentially get them interested and aware of their products. I think the thing that you saw really change and evolve, especially over the last year or two, is really bringing commerce increasingly into that initial content experience, where you have basically every significant social platform where, again, like Instagram, where I was for a number of years, but especially in the last year, TikTok, really bring the transaction into the platform itself. And while, I think this brings complexity and a lot of, additional things that brands need to work about, it also brings a lot of interesting opportunity. This is the reality, is that this is where consumers are spending time. And for more than anything else, this is a place where brands and consumers are interacting more than anywhere else. And so instead of being most important that you have that Madison or Fifth Avenue store, that digital footprint and that digital footprint on the social channels becomes the way that consumers know your brand. And it's the halo that kind of will overshadow everything else that they might do and they might know about your brand. And so, the reality is like it creates this great opportunity. But the other thing about the social platforms is that's not just about you directly, but about your community on these platforms. If you look at the major platforms, it's not the brands that are driving most of the content and most of the interaction. It's your community of people who are both kind of official brand ambassadors that you've worked with, but even more, people who are just excited about your brand and excited about your product. And now that the platforms have made it really easy for inspiration to go to transaction, it really presents a really interesting opportunity for those brands that are really leaning in. Across our portfolio, we're investing heavily on, not only the individual platforms themselves, but then creating one cohesive digital footprint and thinking about this being a really great way to have a two-way conversation with consumers, both our existing consumers, but also introducing ourselves to a whole new population, both through our own sites, but also then, through our community of fans on each of these platforms.
So as you talk about these communities, I mean, it's really the role of influencer now, right? So what role is influencer marketing playing? And it seems to really be on the rise.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, I think in many ways it gives a very different flavor to how a brand can show up. I think historically brands have been very protective and careful about who they are, how they show up across different channels. And what you see a lot from consumers is that they're looking for kind of that unpolished, more authentic and more off the cuff that, influencers can really provide. They give you a way to have a much more diverse and varied brand voice that still is connected to that who you are as a core brand. But, instead of just having, five very well-known celebrities be the face of your brand, you now have the ability of having thousands, if not tens of thousands, if not, the most prolific influencer users, even hundreds of thousands of people showcase the brand in a way that can relate to all these very different niche communities that exist across the US, but even more so even globally. And so, it really just allows you to have a much more diverse voice, which I think increasingly consumers are looking for, and allow you to showcase a product in a way that is important and relevant to each of the many different customers that you might have, and really meet the customer with a form of content that resonates with who they are today. And really, again, is something that is approachable, accessible, and much more achievable in many ways of how that brand and how that product actually is for the average person.
Yeah. So you mentioned, celebs versus, the average person. I read a stat recently, I think, that said, at least with the younger generation, Gen Z, I think this was a stat from, that they trust their online communities at least half as much as they trust their own families, which
Mm,
is pretty staggering. But I guess my question is, how important is it to really designate those influencers that do come from a high profile Hollywood, athletic background versus just, people who are making their name on TikTok today?
right. It really depends on what you're trying to achieve and what demographic also you're trying to kind of reach. What we saw time and again, if you're looking to just drive overall top line brand awareness, if you're a brand and you're trying to, launch yourself for the first time, or that you're a brand that's launching a new product line or something like that, those celebrities and very well-known uh, personalities are extremely effective just because of their size of the number of people that they connect to with literally every piece of content that they create, right? People like Taylor Swift, Selena Gomez, all of these people have like, you know, global coverage that is almost the size of the population of the United States. And so if you want something that is going to just drive really broad awareness at a pretty superficial level, they can be really effective. I think the thing that you've seen brands realize, especially over the last year to 3 years, is that if you actually want to drive sales, though, it is much more these creators who are much more well-tuned and, quite honestly, more well trained at using the tools of these different platforms much more effectively, as well as kind of average day, everyday people that are much more effective at actually showcasing the product and the product in the way that an average consumer would use it. Right. If
Mhm.
I see a dress and I see it on a celebrity, the reality is like they have a whole team of stylists, they have a trainer, they have this whole, entity that helps them look the way they look.
Mhm.
That same dress on, like, a creator that has 15,000 followers, it then looks much more on how it would look like on me. And so that like accessibility and that understanding of what that product actually is just a very different level. And what we see in being able to be much more accessible to the community, it much more readily will turn into a sale. I think especially as brands in the last 2 to 3 years have become much more aware of how digital marketing needs to actually drive true ROI, sales have obviously become increasingly important. And so being able to go from content to transaction has become increasingly important. And so, for a lot of the brands that we work with, we've actually gone very down market into some of these, smaller creators, which, they may only have 20, $50,000, 50,000 followers. But what we know is that those followers are really engaged. They really trust the recommendations of our individuals, and that recommendation isn't just something that will kind of live superficially in that person's head, but it is much more readily going to turn into a sale.
Yeah. Yeah, we like to talk about driving traffic and transactions for retailers, and traffic is great, but to your point, transactions better. I mean, you got to close the sale, and that's what a lot of these different channels are doing now. And I really did think we were going to get through a whole webinar without mentioning Taylor Swift, but
How
apparently
could
15
we? How
minutes
could we?
in, we already mentioned Taylor Swift. I'm just going to ask Michael, you've got a lot of experience targeting these younger demographics, and we'll talk about that, a little bit more coming up. But do you have anything to add around influencers and authenticities around Gen Z right now?
Well, I think, Doug brought it up, but I think there is a distinction between the Gen Z and let's call it Gen A demographic, because I think where Doug was talking about those micro influencers, those consumers who will follow, what someone who they think is authentic is, and someone that looks like them, what they're going to buy. Whereas Gen A, they're probably still highly influenced by the celebrities, the Taylor Swifts and the such things. So I think, Doug said it really depends upon who your core audience that you're going after is.
Yeah.
Because, if you're going, my daughter wants to see Taylor Swift, right?
I took my daughter to Taylor Swift. She was amazing. I highly recommend it. But I love what Doug said about showcasing the way that the average consumer or your target consumer is actually going to use the product. I think that's just a point to highlight here. It's very different because we're not going to look at a celebrity and look the same way in a dress or using the same makeup as they are. So I love that point you made.
Yeah,
Uh,
and maybe one quick thing just to add on, I think also the proliferation of video allows you to do that in a very different way than you might have been able to do, 3 or 5 years ago. Where like with a still image, I think people are really attracted to the aesthetics and the beauty of an image. In a video, you want to see the reality of it all. And you've obviously seen the massive transition to short form video across all of these platforms. And so again, I think just being able to see what the product is and how it can be experienced has become increasingly important to the consumer.
So you bring up a good point. I mean, video is not something that a lot of retailers have leveraged until recent years. And as I've read through all the trades, it looks like video is definitely hot for 2024 as well. How has the overall digital footprint evolved these last couple of years for retailers from your perspective, Doug?
Yeah, I mean, I think one, what you've already kind of named, it is video. And the reality is a reason retailers, in my experience, have not done it is that it's not easy, right? Not only are they need to make the transition from kind of still to video, but the type of video that a lot of people are looking for is just very different from what kind of retailers and brands of all kinds, quite honestly, are used to making themselves. Again, I think there's this push for like more authentic, less polished, and more real content, whatever that means. But like, in the end, retailers and the way that they're generally set up with obviously lots of different organizations with lots of different opinions, the ability to really create content at a very fast clip, to really, connect to things that are happening in culture and media and just around the world. Most
Mhm.
retailers are not well set up to be able to do that. And so again, that's where you see a lot of people leaning into creators and influencers because again, they're just much better at it. They know how to use these tools. They have perfected how to engage with people, grab their attention, and get them wanting more. And so, I think you see the most progressive retailers starting to like let go a little bit the reins of control that they've historically had on who the brand is and how it needs to be represented. And just because there is this need for content that quite honestly 99% of brands are not very good at doing themselves.
Yeah, and it's that staying true to the brand while bringing more of that authenticity in and that realism in. Yeah. Well, we all know shoppers expect a seamless experience across channels, across physical and digital channels, and they use a mix of both. So, Mark, let me ask you, what do brands and retailers need to do to keep top of mind when it comes to creating an optimal marketing mix that assures they reach new customers, but also ensures that they're retaining their current customers?
Yeah, I think first you start off with what the definition is of optimal, because it's not optimal for every business. What's optimal to one is not optimal to another. If you're in a growth mode, perhaps more important than anything is how you acquire new customers, and that may take you down one path. If you're a more mature brand, you still need new customers, but you might rely more heavily on rebuy rate of customers that you have already have. So I think getting that out, the definition of what's important, and it's not usually an either or. It's that you're trying to optimize for a number of different things. It could be for brand awareness. It could be for that new customer acquisition. It could be for rebuy. It could be just to get to help drive traffic to a store fleet. So it could be a lot of different things. So I think understanding the definition is first and foremost. Being somewhat of an analytical guy, I think that the analytics really play a lot into this. And back to the same thing about definition, you need to understand what metrics you feel like you need to measure and whether or not you can measure them. So your cost of customer acquisition. Be shocked at how many brands I walk into today that you would think are mature enough where they would fully understand and talk to CAC, what their cost of customer acquisition is, what that relates to in LTV, so the CAC to LTV ratio. Be surprised how many brands don't really know that information. And I'm going to generalize a lot of the earlier stage digitally native companies, they seem to be built and born off of those metrics. but some of the older, more mature, businesses that in theory have had this data forever still don't fully understand, some of that. So I think measurement is key. What do you want to measure? And frankly, the tools that you have to use. Do you rely on simple out of the box? Well, it used to be simple GA4, which is no longer simple. But do you rely on free Google Analytics? Do you rely on their paid version? Do you do something that's more elaborate? But whatever it is, you need to make sure that it's refined for the goals that you've got, and that the data is accurate. Again, so many businesses, they see data in one platform, it's saying one thing, maybe they're on Shopify and the Shopify data says something else. So agree internally on what your source of truth is, and make sure you're constantly validating. I think the second part of the optimal media mix is around content. You heard a lot from Doug talking about the different forms of content. It's a constant need to iterate, especially if you're relying heavily on social channels. It takes these algorithms a while to learn, but once they do learn, you can refine quickly. I read a story. I'm not going to use the numbers because I don't remember exactly what they were, but the fact is that the amount of content that most brands put out there based upon the percentage of things of that content that are winners is not nearly enough. There's just not enough content going out there in order for you to really find enough winners to move the needle in your business. So the production of content, refining it, perhaps you're a business that's got multiple customer bases that you are targeting. When I was at Steve Madden, we had the early stage, young high school, junior high school, young woman. We also catered to men as well, all the way up to their moms. And you can't speak to all people in exactly the same way, and you've got to be able to, create different tactics for different audiences. I think the other part is about testing. Kind of goes back to my content thing. We all talk about testing. Not everybody fully understands the right methodology of how to test, how to analyze, and then iterate off of that. So I think testing is key, and also coming at this with an open mind. And I'll give you a perfect example back to our days of kind of being in the direct mail and catalog business. Again, I'm generalizing. The catalogers that knew that they needed to become less reliant on paper, they tended to err on the side of attribution to the catalog because it's what they knew, it's what they were comfortable with, and they kept saying to themselves, geez, if I believe that attribution model, it's going to say I should mail less catalogs. And they fought that. And I think that slowed down the reliance or the move to digital for many catalogers.
Well, we
And then,
also made
I just,
ourselves believe that an online acquired customer was worth less over time than a digitally acquired customer, which we flipped the narrative on that as well.
great point. That's exactly right. If I had $1 for every time that conversation came up, geez, I just can't find, somebody through paid search that has the same lifetime value as a catalog customer. And oh, by the way, the universe, the pool from which you had available to go fish was diminishing. So you really were forced over time to find those digital tactics that could give you somebody with the same or better lifetime value. And I guess the last point on this is leaving some dollars. It kind of goes back to testing, not so much on content, but on tactics. We are all, especially in a tough economic climate, focused on driving performance dollars, and many brands leave out top of funnel brand awareness kinds of initiatives. They also leave out dollars for testing. One of the first thing that gets cut, I see all the time when a CFO says, geez, you need to take X dollars out of your marketing budget. It's usually top of funnel because I can't measure it quite the same way that I can measure, mid and bottom of funnel performance marketing, and then the tactics that are going to take some time to learn about, those new ones, whether it be Pinterest or TikTok or anything else that's edge for your business. So leave some dollars in there to help refine the optimal media mix.
No, I think all good points. You were talking about tools, and Google's definitely made it a little more challenging for us with the move to GA4. But you also were talking about, the different systems where the data resides, and how one of the challenges that we faced for many years is the silos of data. Are you seeing those silos breaking down more so that you can have a system of truth to make some of these decisions out of?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I think not all brands are there yet. The real challenges that I see are the ones that have physical retail and they have a digital/direct mail business. Maybe they've got two different platforms. Their point of sale, is different. Maybe it's a Shopify for digital and they use something else for POS, and they still have two system. So you can't look at Mark Friedman's shopping experience across the brand. You can only look at it in a silo. But if you look at the continued development of customer data platforms, and they take on lots of flavors, and there's lots of competition on a Forrester type grid. But yeah, I do think there's more and more of trying to get that system of truth, where this is the place you go for your measurement and your reporting. But the other part of it is how you activate these customers, how you activate these audiences. Treating a one-time customer digitally like they're a one-time customer, but they may also have shopped retail. If you send that, and it may not be this overt, but if you communicate out to your customer that you think they've only shopped once from you, because that's all the data you have, but in fact, they're buying from you much more frequently, but it's in a retail channel, you look silly. And, I think the data today lends itself that we shouldn't have to look silly.
Yeah, I agree. Doug, I can only imagine your thoughts on this conversation, ranging from the understanding the definitions to analytics to tools to testing. And as Mark brought up top of funnel, you're months into your role at WHP. Any experience that you've got as you are trying to determine what that optimal digital mix is across these brands? And it probably varies by brand.
Well, so I mean, that's been the most difficult thing is, our the way our company is structured is that we are acquiring brands that many times have existed for years, if not decades. And so a large part of a large part of my first, year and role has been, okay, let's forget what everyone has in place today, because it's like a Frankenstein of commerce stacks that's been pulled together over time. And let's figure out what is that data that we need and try to have something consistent, because one of the advantages of who we are as a company is that then we can create kind of a consumer understanding superset that is not just brand by brand, but actually brings together data from all the different brands into an even broader understanding than almost any brand could create themselves. I think very transparently, I think we're on like step one of that, where of just being able to like have the foundation in place to be able to capture the right data to get that better understanding of the consumer. But I think the one thing that everyone was probably expecting us to say at some point, and I'll say it probably a little bit prematurely, AI then is so important to us as we think about kind of this data then being able to drive a lot of really efficient and effective ways of connecting not only to our existing consumer, but also finding new consumers. And so, it's very top of mind, but very transparently, we're still very much still in process of figuring all of this out, because so much has also changed in the last 5 to 10 years that like we need something that's not only going to work today, but we know it's going to continue to evolve. So how do we future-proof it as much as possible?
Yeah. One thing that I don't think we've specifically called out here is email as one of these channels. In talking with Bryson last week from Black Diamond, he said that email was a real clear winner for them coming out of holiday, and he adding in SMS, MMS as well. How did that perform for you out of holiday?
Yeah, I mean, for us, especially in a world where you have, due to changes in how, Apple OS has happened and the oncoming, deprecation of cookies that is happening over browsers, we've focused a lot on building out a customer database with an own channel that we know we will get to the right people who we know are interested in the brand. And, again, there have been so many advances over the last year or two about, okay, instead of just, I think 2 years ago, your average brand would send one email to its entire listserv and to its entire email list and not necessarily have all this like personalization and segmentation that is now possible with a lot of the tools that exist. And so we were able to be, some of that personalization that I think consumers have expected and have come to see in social platforms now are happening in email too. And so it's being much more performant than what we had expected and had seen. And so in a world where, media prices are likely going to, continue to increase over time, this becomes a channel that we can control much more readily. And so are very much focusing on building out, not only over the holiday season, but also kind of ongoing throughout the year.
Something I'm
And
curious about.
Stacy,
Oh, yeah.
Stacy, can I just throw in one comment? And again, every business is a little bit different. I would say that from a bunch of companies that I've worked with and heard from, that email, albeit still very important, was one of the channels that they are struggling the most with year over year. There was this big run up of performance, during the COVID years, and perhaps they put on a lot of, new email addresses. But when you look at like for like, even comp segments, last 30 or 60 or 90-day engaged people, they're just not performing as well as they had in the past. And, I don't know if that's a function of SMS. I don't know if it's a function of, retailers continuing to push the envelope and how many emails they can hit, people with in a given period of time. But, great that, Doug is seeing some positive, benefit in his business. I think there's others that are not as lucky.
I think part of it too depends on the maturity of the brands. One thing Bryson mentioned, Black Diamond is still a very much of an up and coming growth brand. So they were not even emailing once a day to their email file during holiday in 2022. So it was more about increasing that to a daily outreach, seeing the benefits there. And I think segmentation was going to be more of a focus for them heading into 2024.
Yeah, and the only other thing I would add is I think we're very lucky. Like the brand I was thinking about most as I thought about this was Toys R Us, where we're very lucky in many ways that like our brand in many ways is very well attuned to having really great content around it, right? We have this, we have this mascot, Jeffrey, who's surrounding me as we speak, that like, I think is different than a lot of how brands show up in email, where we were very content forward that then had some shoppability elements within it. And because our industry of like toys and games, I think is something that is different than the kind of most of the content you see from most other retailers and brands. We really tried to make it not just like a sales tactic, but just a way to connect. And like, we have, things that aren't necessarily sales oriented, whether it be trivia, whether it be, again, videos, whether it be, checking in on Jeffrey's holiday plans, like all these things that make it kind of engaging in itself, which as a brand, I think we're very lucky that like it very naturally plays into that. I can imagine where if it's, if you're really kind of drilling into more of a sales, more of a pure sales lever that, especially during the holiday season where I know as a consumer, I was like overwhelmed by the number of like emails I was getting from all the different brands I'm connected to. I could see it was probably harder to break through than it might have been in years past.
I also am thinking generationally, like the efficacy of email. So it kind of brings me to our next topic around the younger generation of Gen Z and even Gen Alpha or Gen A, as Michael referred to it. So these consumers certainly showed up during holiday. They made a big impression and and a lot of transactions during the holiday. And Michael, you've got a lot of experience here as someone who works closely with retail and fashion brands, as well as Gen Z consumers through BCG's the Z Suite, which is a network of Gen Z thought leaders in that demographic. What are some of the things that you've learned and that you're seeing out there?
Well, let me start off that I am not a Gen Z consumer shopper or expert, but my daughter fits the Gen A. So I think where Mark's maybe a little analytical, I'm going to come up with a lot of anecdotal from my daughter because I watched how they shop through her. And I think when I look back, you know, you look at the two groups, there's been a lot, and we all read the same publications, a lot about the Gen Z consumer. So there's not a lot here that people don't already know about how they shop, you know, where they come from, what their values are. So what I thought I could do is just maybe like kind of look at the differences between, let's say, the Gen Z and a Gen A shopper, whether it comes from their priorities, their shopping channels, their shopping behaviors, the emerging trends, their spending habits. And I thought, you know, I did have an under over on Taylor of about 15 minutes, so we were a little over because I wasn't sure when I was going, but I just think the whole Taylor Swift NFL Kansas City Chiefs things it's such an amazing just case study, if you will. I mean, it came out the last couple of days, like 300 and something million dollars that the NFL and the Chiefs kind of realized based off of just her showing up to games and dating. But I think it's also the network effect of that, right? You see not only for Taylor and Travis, I mean, their influence has gone up. I mean, Travis Kelce went from the number 91st sold jersey to number one in a couple weeks. He's still in top five. He has a number one podcast now. He's gained over 1 million followers. Same with Taylor. But how are brands even looking at that and addressing it as well? Look what Heinz did. They created a new condiment for Taylor. You saw the New Balance sneaker that everybody wanted to buy. And what I think what I see from that is how these two cohorts, the Gen Zs and Gen A's, are looking at how they're going to behave, and they're basing it off these influences. And I think there's two separate influences, right? And I think, you know, for me, their priorities, if you look at a Gen Z customer, their priorities are around personalization, their ethics, you know, they're not just price oriented. They want sustainability. We've heard that over and over. They want something that aligns with their social values. And then you look at my daughter and the Gen A's, it's more about like the cutting edge technologies, the futuristic features, high tech gadgets, immersive experiences, right? It's funny, my daughter's going to turn 13, so we're getting ready for her bat mitzvah. And as an Irish guy, this is all new for me. But the fun thing is like apparently they all get gifts at the end. And so my daughter was just like, oh, just give away one of the, you know, Apple Vision Pros. Just like, you know, that's what they want. Yeah, the $3,500 gift is what I'm going to be throwing out as gifts afterwards. I was thinking more pencil case or maybe some pens that they could draw with, some crayons, but just shows you where I land in that. But
Michael,
I think that just shows
it's tradition. Michael, it's tradition, a car, right? It's a car. That's what you need to give her.
I hope not, because I can't see them driving yet. So I think that's, you know, looking at their priorities. I also look at like their shopping channels, like where are they shopping? Where is Gen Z shopping? They're shopping online, they're offline. They're using kind of the online world to research where they're going to then go shop in store, right? That's what they're looking for, that whole omni-channel experience. I think Gen A, as I look at them, they're more influenced by the digital platforms, right? They're more into the social media and the online marketplaces, the online. I mean, we don't have to look further than Roblox. So when 2020 hit, my daughter started going on Roblox because that was where they could connect, right? But now they're shopping, and now they're getting older and they start being influenced by brands. I mean, look at what American Eagle has done in the metaverse, right? I know you're not supposed to use metaverse, but let's use digital innovations. But that they're really being successful. Gucci has been successful in that realm, and they're using of you know, American Eagle's case, they developed an augmented pop-up store with Snap, right? And they saw real sales results from that. So I think the brands, they really need to look at both of these cohorts in two different ways, but they both have the dollars that they want to spend. I think another area to look at differences around their brand loyalty. I think Gen Z, as we know, they're probably less loyal than probably our generation. They're more focused on social responsibility. They will look at your transparency, they'll look at your social values, and they will move from one to another based on how you present your brand. Right? I think Gen Alpha, I think, pretty nascent. They're still developing those types of preferences. So this is my, going back to Doug's point about looking at the influencer marketing side of it, this is where the Gen Alphas are being influenced by celebrities. They are being influenced by TikToks. They're being influenced by brands that they probably would not have heard of other than TikTok. Take Drunk Elephant, for example. My daughter knows about, I know about Drunk Elephant. I shouldn't know about Drunk Elephant. But then, what they're doing is they're going in these stores and they are shopping and they have this need to shop for it, right? It's almost like this, if they don't get it now, they're not going to get it mentality. They're wreaking havoc, I think, on the Sephora stores, where they've actually had to hide the Drunk Elephant product behind the counters because the kids were so crazed about it. But so I think, from those two perspectives, you have a community that's very focused on, if we're looking at how they're influenced on the micro influencers, whereas Gen Alpha is still being influenced by celebrities.
So then how do brands start to drive loyalty with the Gen Z?
With Gen Z? Well, I think there's with Gen Z, driving, you have to be authentic. You have to be transparent.
Yeah.
I mean, those are two of their biggest things that they go on. I think, they are very fickle. It's funny because there's that kind of story, but we've heard about, they want to be sustainable. They want to shop ethically, right? But at a price, right? So if price comes into the equation, more often than not, price is going to win in those situations. So yes, they want to stay true to themselves and true to brands that have that. But I think from a loyalty perspective, I think Gen Z, they're a less loyal cohort. Now, again, these are general statements, but I think Gen Alpha, they will be influenced more by celebrities. I think Gen Z, you just have to be authentic and transparent.
Yeah, no, all good points. And we talk a lot about this Gen A, and I don't know any 12-year-old that needs a 12-step skincare regimen quite yet. But coming out of the direct marketing world, privacy, my spidey sense goes up when we start talking about targeting Gen A's. These are minors. Do you see regulation coming out more around this targeting or influencing of this?
Well, I think you will. Yeah, I think you will, specifically in beauty. And that's I think that's where it's been the most talked about because of that point you're just making. They don't know what they're putting on. They don't know the chemicals. Now, I know a lot of those brands also have products that are specifically designed to target, let's say, that customer. But to your point, do they need it? But then you look at what TikTok, you look at the people that have built amazing followings of the world. It's around, the get ready with me kind of movement. They're all sitting down before big parties, or they're going to a big birthday party. They all meet beforehand and they go through their skincare routine. And so they all know the products. They all search for the same thing. So you'd be, I guess, silly not to at least look at that audience as a future spender for your brand. I mean, they also, if you think about it, Gen A also follows in the footprints of the parents. So if you look at the brands that they're shopping at, Sephora, Lululemon, and the such, they're shopping there because that's where their parents shop as well. So they're still being influenced by their parents. So brands almost can get a double whammy, so to speak, in terms of their marketing, because they could bring in the mom and they could bring in the daughter into the same store and get two transactions.
Yeah, great point. All right. We've gotten through, I think, most of this webinar, and only Doug has mentioned AI thus far. So it wouldn't be a topical webinar if we didn't discuss it. So what role do you each think AI will play in 2024? Mark, let's kick it to you.
So, I think one of the things to be fair is there's lots of things that we've been doing that have been reliant on AI before AI became, kind of the buzzword, whether it be on-site recommendations or things like that. That was really, machine learning. So much of what we relied on from Google and Facebook to Meta to drive us traffic was AI. I think you'll continue to see, on-site feature and function be leveraged more using artificial intelligence. I think you'll also start to see it in customer service, or more so than today. Finding ways to reduce the costs in customer service, but at the same time help you to improve customer satisfaction scores, which ultimately should help you drive revenue at the same time of reducing costs. That I think is one of the big opportunity areas for us.
All right.
Yeah, and if I could just add, I mean, when Doug brought it up, what he was talking about, I heard that conversation a lot. Is how AI is going to impact the business, and a lot of the CEOs and C-suite executives are talking about looking at their entire tech stack, right? And they use the term of tech debt. They have so many different tech providers that are solving very small things a part of their business. And when they look at their customer journey, they probably have dozens of custom companies that are solving, and all of that data, to the point earlier, is how do you distill that? And I think AI has that ability to come in and maybe look at the whole value chain and create something that, so a brand or retailer may only have to use a few different companies to get the same kind of data instead of having things so siloed. So AI, really around, I think to Mark's point, like customer service, and I also think on the back end in terms of what your supply chain inventory looks like.
Great. Doug, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're using, and I'm probably biased to leaning towards this use case, because I mean, as Mark was saying, like AI has become trendy, but most brands and retailers and any consumer company has been using AI for years, right? All of the platforms are AI driven. That's what the algorithm is. And so we've started really leaning into that in terms of being able to create at scale many more different versions of different visual assets, different kind of email copy, different subject lines. And, I think there are separate tools that did this here and there. But, I think this ability to kind of have it in the flow of what the tools that people on our team were already using, and make it really easy that instead of having one version, let's very quickly test 5 versions with 1% of our audience, see which one works, and then, use it for the other 99%. We just have this ability to test and learn much more easily, and be able to really find the kind of nuanced message that's working. And then also have different versions if we want to have different segments. I think connecting back to what I was saying around email, we had historically been doing not much segmentation in terms of messaging or email subject line or any of that. Now we are being a little bit more precise, and with all of the different kind of messages as well as the assets to map to the what we do know about those individuals, and making sure it maps to what they might care about.
Yeah, now, and we talked about, consumers demanding a seamless customer experience, or, from channel to channel, but you're talking about personalization and speaking to them in more of a one-to-one instead of a one-to-many approach. So that's a great use case for AI. Well, we've just got a few minutes left, so I thought I would turn it over to each of you to maybe give one more key trend that you see shaping the retail landscape in 2024, one or a couple. Michael, let's start with you.
Well, we all talked about AI already. I think, early we talked about the buy now, pay later industry and the kind of the usage going up. One of the things I think to look at as we go through 2024 is that there's pending regulations around buy now, pay laters, as they currently are right now. Right now, they're not something that gets credit checked from the consumer. Consumers can just do as many as they want. They're finding that a lot of consumers are stacking them. And so where the promise of having a $100 loan and dividing it over 6 weeks is an easy thing to manage. Well, if you have 15 of those, it gets a lot less harder to manage that. And so regulations coming in is going to change the way the consumers look at that and how brands are looking at it too, because each time they do that, they're losing control over that data of that customer to that technology company. So looking at like white label solutions or things where brands can actually own the data themselves and then control the flexible payments themselves is, I think, a sea change that you're going to see happen in 2024.
Yeah, that's a great point. Mark.
I think the whole resale and circularity, maybe it's a little bit outside what you were thinking, but I think this is going to be a year for either we're going to continue to lean in and figure out a way how to monetize this, or we're going to wind up pulling back in many cases. But there are lots of rules that are coming down the pike, especially for apparel retailers, where they will need to. It's really got momentum in Europe. Where you will, need to have a game plan for the recyclability of your products, and kind of that game plan for where does this stuff go when it's past its useful life or when people want to get rid of it. And it's it's going to be a big deal for our industry. And we've had lots of brands to try to do resale. I don't know that any of them are thinking it's the next best thing, but it certainly sends a good message to their consumers that they're thinking about the world. So,
Yeah. Yeah. And a topic that hadn't come up yet today. So thanks for that. All right, Doug.
Yeah, I mean, I think in addition to the personalization, which we've chatted through, I think the thing that we as brands have, I think in my view, unfortunately trained our consumers to do is to buy things online, expect free shipping, and then like try them on at home and then return them. And like you have all these individual boxes that are coming, I live in New York in an apartment building, literally, my building's only 45 units. There are 50 boxes every day. And the consumer is so used to it. But I think we're now as brands dealing with the backside of that, which is where you have kind of this return issue, which is like not only kind of an inventory issue where you have inventory out in the world that you're actually not able to sell because someone buys it, waits to day 29 to return it, and then it gets processed, and then maybe 15 days later you're able to resell it. You have it as a drag on kind of your P&L because A, you're returning a lot of those sales that you're getting. B, you have all the costs associated with both shipping and returning, because everyone expects, because of Amazon, free shipping, free returns, free everything. And then, something as like a person really drags on me is like the sustainability issue of it all, where you have all these boxes and transit and everything that is creating, again, this tax on kind of commerce overall that like, I think brands are going to be, and we're trying to be much more creative in how we think about it, and that we get people to buy the product that they really want. Especially anything online, it's become very common to buy like 3 sizes of one thing. How do we help them find the size that they want, while also finding more creative ways of using that inventory of, potentially having an ability to, and this is, TBD if this is actually possible, instead of it being shipped back to our warehouse, we like resell it while it's in the hand of the consumer. And so instead of it shipping to them, they ship it to the next consumer. I think there's a lot of questions on whether this is actually feasible, but the more we can kind of create efficiencies in that, I think the less painful all of that will be. And I think that, sorry, the last thing I would say is just like also figuring out where to meet the consumer where they are. I think, we were talking a lot about all these different channels of, social platforms, email, whatnot, but then you have all these marketplaces that exist, right? In a world where Amazon is, almost 50% of total sales, how do you as a brand have your own identity, but also make sure you meet the consumer where they are, so that, when they're in the shopping mode, your product is there for them. And it's really easy, again, for them to like not only think of you, but actually to buy from you. And so really, meeting that consumer where they are.
Yeah, no, I love that. And as we talked through the creating the optimal channel mix, if I were to take a few things away from this today, it's cross-channel optimization and really determining what that right mix is. And Mark, thanks for walking us through like how to think through that from definitions all the way through test and learn. But the key to success is just what you said, meeting the customer where they are, meeting the consumer, where he or she is at any given moment, in any given channel. It's going to be critical. I think understanding the generational differences between millennials than the Gen Z, the Gen A. I think there's a lot to unpack there as a lot of brands and retailers try to figure out how to target those younger demographics. And AI isn't new, but it's certainly sexy. And if we got to talk about it in new ways, but you talked about 3 very different ways of leveraging AI, from a customer service perspective to supply chain perspective to just hyper personalization, all really good points. We are at the top of the hour, so it's all the time that we have for today. And I saw we have other questions come through that we can try to follow up with folks on. But again, thank you so much, Doug, Mark, and Michael, for your participation today. And thank you all for attending the Unwrapping Holiday Success webinar brought to you by Merge. And have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thanks,
Thank
Stacey.
you.
Thanks, guys.